Hey guys, Joshua Klein here, and it is another episode of the Draft Beard podcast. Today we're going to be recapping the AFC Central draft classes. You got the Cincinnati Bengals, Cleveland Browns, Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to get started tonight with the Cleveland Browns. Not a big fan of their draft class. They didn't have a lot of picks to begin with, mostly due to acquiring Deshaun Watson. I have them actually as the 31st overall class in this draft. So obviously that's pretty low, lowest obviously in the AFC Central. They started out here in the second round, picking up Michael Hall. He is an interior pass rusher from Ohio State. I kind of see him more as a NASCAR package type interior defensive lineman, not really a full-time starter. Hey, he gets to play with Jim Schwartz as his defensive coordinator. Jim's a phenomenal defensive coordinator. I think he can do wonders for him. Gets to play next to Myles Garrett. Anybody gets to play next to Myles Garrett's going to get some free room to roam. So it could be a good pick. I wasn't a big fan of him. I don't have him in my top 100. I know a lot of other people have him in their top 40. So I know the Cleveland Browns were kind of targeting him. So a situational pass rusher. I don't see a full-time 3-down starter. Round 3, we got Zach Zinter, guard out of Michigan. I think he's a guy who can come in and eventually be an adequate starter in the NFL. That's a good thing when you're getting into the 3rd, 4th round. If anytime you can get starters, you're not looking to try to nail Pro Bowl people. You'd love to, but that's not kind of where you're going to have the most bang for your buck in terms of results most of the time. 3rd, 4th round. Hopefully you get a quality starter, special teams player, that kind of stuff once you get later into the draft. I like Zach Zinter a lot. I think he's going to be a very good above average starter in the NFL. And then from 85 to 156, they had a big gap there in terms of picks. They ended up taking Jamari Thrash, wide receiver out of Louisville, guy who I think has a ceiling as maybe a number 3 in the NFL. Didn't dislike him, don't like him. So it's kind of like where he is. I think he has a role that can fit in the NFL. In round 6, they picked Nathaniel Watson, linebacker out of Mississippi State. And in round 7, they had 2 picks, Miles Hardin, cornerback out of South Dakota, and Juwan Briggs, defensive tackle out of Cincinnati. Really like the Miles Hardin pick. That is good value there. I had him in my top 175. I think he can be a very good nickel corner in the NFL. Getting a player like that, when you get into round 6, you can maybe start as a nickel when you're running your nickel coverages, play nickel when you're running your dime. I really like him a lot. I think that's a really good pick by Cleveland. But overall, as a draft class, when you really get maybe one above average starter and a nickel starter and situational pass rusher, and that's the bulk of your class, not that big of a fan, not a great draft class. Some of that, again, they're handcuffed by what they had to give up to get Deshaun Watson. So next on the board is the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Cincinnati Bengals had a little bit bigger draft class than the Cleveland Browns. Cincinnati started round 1 with picking up Amarius Mims, the giant offensive tackle out of the University of Georgia. Very raw, very limited starts in his college career. I'm not as high on Amarius Mims. Obviously, I think he has a much lower floor, much higher ceiling. I think it's early for me in trying to take Amarius Mims, and no, I'm definitely not a part of the consensus on him. So that's they picked up at 18. So in my board and in my opinion of him, kind of meh, picking him in the 1st round, in the middle of the 1st round. Now we fast forward into round 2. They pick up Chris Jenkins, defensive tackle out of Michigan. Really like him. He's going to be a guy who can come in and plug a hole that they have in the interior of the defensive line, be a starter in the NFL, probably have a very long career in the NFL. That was a good quality pick by the Cincinnati Bengals. Round 3, pick 80. I'm a big fan of Jermaine Burton. I know that there may be some other flaws out there that are separate from his on-the-field stuff, some off-the-field issues. Obviously, not being a member of the NFL scouting community or a team, we don't really know exactly what the issue is. That causes him to slide into the 3rd round. That is a very good pick for him. He can be a very good Tyler Boyd replacement. I think that's a good job by Cincinnati getting a starting wide receiver 3. I think actually he has a ceiling of a wide receiver 2. So I really like that pick. 3rd round, they come back at pick 97. They pick McKinley Jackson. He's basically an interior run stuffer. I think that's very early for him. I did not have him in my top 175. So bit of a reach there, but I can see what they're trying to do. You kind of filled the DJ Reader hole that was left when he left by a free agency. You fill that by a 2 players, rotational run stuffer. I think you got an every down D tackle in Chris Jenkins. You come back in rounds 4 and 6. We're going to pair these together, getting tight ends, pass catching tight ends. Joe Burrow loves to go to his tight ends. I think these could potentially be very good blankets for Joe Burrow. Really like Eric All. I really like Tanner out of Arizona there. Another pass catching. They're not going to line up, be blocking tight ends. Tanner's more of a wide receiver at the tight end position. So I think it's a good job to just, if he doesn't have that injury history, he's a very productive tight end. I really liked him when he was at the University of Michigan. Wish he wouldn't have gotten hurt playing for the University of Iowa. But those are two solid picks there by the Cincinnati Bengals. And in between those tight ends, you had Josh Newton out of TCU. He had a down year in 2023. I like him. He can be a serviceable number 3, number 4 corner for you. He could develop a little bit better than that from the tape that we saw in 2022, but I did like that pick. And then again, you take a flyer in Cedric Johnson in round 6, an edge rusher out of Ole Miss. Another good dart throw at the board to see if you can get someone who can be, guy who can be in the rotation on the defensive end. And then the last two, they got DeJohn Anthony, defensive back, and then Matt Lee out of Miami. Matt Lee, athletic, didn't have him as a draftable player, but borderline. So, take a stab at getting a guy that maybe if he could hit as your backup center or backup offensive guard in round 7, I think that's a good quality thing. Really liked I really liked their draft. My favorite pick of the draft for them is Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. Fills a need. He was right there, right about where he should have been drafted on the draft board. So I really like that. Obviously, my least favorite pick is going to be Amarius Mims. I know I'm in the minority in that. That's okay. You take your takes, you take your evaluations, you live with them, you die by them. Most draft analysts, we're all 50% at best. NFL GMs are 40, 50% hit rate if you're really, an average general manager. So, because that's about the hit rate of a lot of average picks in the NFL draft. So you got a 50-50 shot that you might be right. And I'm taking my 50-50 shot that I'm not a big fan of Amarius Mims long-term. I think that floor is just too low. So not my favorite pick. It's all right. A couple years from now, I'll be proven right or proven wrong. And we just stick to what we got and your evaluations, you don't stray from it and you go with it. Next up, the Baltimore Ravens, another team here that I didn't like their first round pick. I'm not a big fan of Wiggins in terms of what I like out of my corners. I like them to be able to tackle. I think his aggressive play style with his thin frame can lead to long-term injury concerns. He's a phenomenal player, so I'm not dogging the player at all. He is fast. He's going to be able to run down the field. He's going to be able to stick with the wide receiver. So he has the potential. And of course, he goes to who? The Baltimore Ravens, right? Again, I'm going to say this over and over. Your situation really matters and your success in the NFL, maybe just professional sports in general. Wasn't a huge fan of Nate Wiggins. Also, they really needed to get maybe a better offensive tackle. That tackle class really started to get thinner really quick. And there was a lot of good ones, and they didn't make a move up in the first round to get one. Now, maybe they tried and it just didn't work out and the price tags were too high, or you didn't have teams willing to move down. So I would have liked to see them move up in the first round. I'm not going to ding them for not doing that because they did at least get a tackle in the next round. I think one of the more athletic tackles that they can develop. I like Roger Rosengarten in the second round out of Washington. I do think that's a good pick for them. So you got to kind of compare that. Would you rather had a little bit lesser corner on most boards and a better tackle? The Ravens decided that Nate Wiggins was the best player on the board at the time. And of course, the Ravens are phenomenal at drafting and developing players. I think those in Wiggins, hey, he may pan out because he went to the right situation. I like the Rosengarten pick. I don't know if he's ready to come in and play this year as a full-time starter, but I think he can develop into a good tackle for them. Adiza Isaac, perfect pick for them. I like that one a lot as well. He's going to be a guy who can do something that they don't already have. They have a lot of guys who can just rush the passer standing up. Adiza is going to be better with his hand in the dirt. I think he fills a good spot there in Baltimore. Daventez Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina. They get him in round 4, about where he should have been drafted. I know early on in the process, a lot of people had Daventez higher up. He's got some issues with his hands. I think he's going to need some development. And the Ravens really need a guy who can stretch the field. I think they can develop him. He can be a good field stretcher for them. Wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 type player is his ceiling. His floor, unfortunately, is not being in the NFL very long. Then you come up with TJ Tampa at pick 130 in round 4. This is a great pick in terms of value on the board. I actually had TJ Tampa higher than Nate Wiggins on my draft board just because his size, he's a little taller than Nate. He tackles a little bit better. At least he's a willing tackler. I don't see the injury concerns. He can play man press fairly well. Obviously, he doesn't have the high upside as Nate Wiggins. Snagging TJ Tampa in the 4th round, I think it's a great pick. Rasheen Ali out of Marshall, that is a good player to kind of pair with the bigger running backs that they already have. Taking a stab at Devin Leary, that's a great time to take a stab on a quarterback, a developmental one. That was a good one. And then you got Nick Samick and taking Kane out of Purdue, the safety. Hopefully those are guys who can contribute on special teams or, fill a backup role. But overall, they came up with a very solid, typical Baltimore Ravens draft. Not one of the upper echelon drafts in the class. I had them, I think, just outside of my top 10 overall drafts in this class. So now we're going to head over to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Pittsburgh Steelers absolutely nailed this draft. They're one of those teams that they have a glaring weakness over the last couple of seasons. And in this draft, like a few other teams that we'll talk about in later episodes, they just went after their deficiencies and absolutely nailed it. Getting Troy Fautanu at number 20, I had him a top 10 overall player. He's going to play tackle, but he can play guard. I know a lot of people do see him as maybe better at a guard. He is so athletic. He is a great fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pretty much any team, I think he's going to be one of the better offensive linemen. Pro Bowl potential. Great pick at number 20. Come back in round 2. They top it off, double up on the offensive line, and they get an offensive center. And man, he screams Pittsburgh Steeler. He screams Detroit Lion. Those tough, gritty guys, that's what they are. And Zach Frazier is going to come in. He can be a starting center for them. He can play guard if he needs to. And he's just going to fit that Pittsburgh Steelers mold. I think he can be a quality NFL starter over the next decade. So first round, you get a Pro Bowl potential tackle. You come back, you get a quality starting potential in Zach Frazier. You come back in round 3 and you nail it again with Roman Wilson. Some people saw him as maybe sneaking into the back end of the first round. Roman Wilson goes in. You get him in the 3rd round at pick 84. Tremendous value. He is going to be a first down machine for them. I really like Roman Wilson's NFL potential. I think a lot of these Michigan receivers that got drafted are going to be better pros than they were in college, just kind of based on the system that Michigan ran. Then you come back in round 3, you get a machine at linebacker in Peyton Wilson. Peyton Wilson's a first-round talent, no doubt, at linebacker. His problem is he's been injured. They say he's playing without an ACL, and I don't remember one of his legs, but I don't remember which one. He is just so fun to watch. He is a game wrecker. He's athletic as all get out. I don't know how long his NFL career is going to be, but for however long it is, Pittsburgh got the man in Peyton Wilson. Again, that is 4 straight picks where they nailed it. You come back in round 4 at pick 119. You get one of my favorite players in this draft, and it's Mason McCormick. Just a mean SOB, and he's so smart. He's very athletic. I think he's going to develop into a starter at guard or center in the NFL. Honestly, I think he has a pretty high ceiling. I really do. I think Mason McCormick, I would have loved him even if the team took him in the 2nd round, getting him in the 4th, and he comes from a smaller school in South Dakota State. He's going to get some time to develop. You don't have to rush him. Again, great pick. 3 top-notch, low-floor, high-ceiling players in the interior of the offensive line and in tackle. Man, they just hammered this draft. Great job so far by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then you come back, you get Logan Lee out of Iowa. Pittsburgh will figure out how to use him. I don't know if he necessarily has a specific position in the NFL. They says defensive tackle. It's kind of a little lean to be a defensive tackle. Maybe he can be part of your NASCAR package, rotational defensive tackle. And then they get Ryan Watts out of Texas. But overall, you nail 5 starters out of this draft. That's phenomenal work by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Absolutely love this draft. In fact, they're going to be, I believe, my number 1 draft class in the entire draft. So if you're a Steelers fan, this is a couple years in a row that your team has just hammered this draft. So with that, that's my overview of the AFC Central. The Cleveland Browns, one of the least liked drafts I have in the draft. Got kind of 2 middle of the pack drafts in the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens, and a really great, excellent draft haul for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see how they pan out over the next couple of years. These are just initial reactions. 3-4 years from now, we'll come back, we'll revisit and see how the teams actually did over the long run. And with that, I'm going to sign out. We'll see you next time on the Draft Beard podcast as we look over another division in the NFL and recap another one, and look forward to going through every single team division by division with you over the next little bit.
The Draft Beard podcast.